In this lesson, we will talk about the new form elements in HTML5. And those are the data list, the Khagan, and the output element. Just to point, not all the browsers support all the new HTML5 form elements. So maybe some of the browsers don't support these elements. But even they are not supported, they will still behave as normal text inputs. The data list elements are pair elements, and they provide a list of predefined options or suggestions for the input elements. So the data list element provides some kind of autocomplete feature for the input element. The data list element, as we said, is a pair element, and inside this element we need to insert another element, and that is the option element. The option element represents the suggested option, but the option element is an empty element, so it only has an opening tag. The brackets editor inserted a closing tag because the same tag it is used in another element, but in that element it has an opening and a closing tag. So it's a pair element. The most important attribute of the option element is the value attribute, in which we will insert the suggestions content. So we can have as many options as we want. And let's insert different values for all the options we have created. But to associate the data list with an input element, first we need to set an ID to the data list element, and we will set the ID my suggestion. And now we'll create an input text element to which we'll associate the data list element. To associate the data list element to the input element, we need to use the list attribute in the input element, and as value we need to set the ID of the data list element. So now this input element will have the suggestions in the data list element. So we can get a suggestion like HTML5, CSS3, JavaScript, and PHP. So now let's see the results in the browser. So here we have our input text element, and as we hover it, we get a little arrow, and when we click it, it will give us the suggestions we've inserted in the data list element. So we have the HTML5, CSS3, JavaScript, and PHP. The same we've inserted in the options element. And if we start to type the first letters of every suggestions, we automatically get the suggestion to insert the value. Next we have the Khagan element. The Khagan element provides a secure way of authenticating the users. The Khagan element specifies a k-pair generator field in the form. When the form is submitted to the server, two keys are generated, one private and one local key. The private key is sent locally and the public key is sent to the server. The public key could be used to generate a client certificate to authenticate the users in the future. So that's all you need about the Khagan element, because if we go deeply on this, it will confuse you. And the last element, the output element, it is used to represent a result of a calculation. The output element is a pair element. What the result means is that, for example, we can calculate the values of the input elements. We can do some kind of calculation, and then we can use the output element to output the result. To show you an example, first make sure you have the form element. Now we will insert two input elements with the type number in the form element and one output element which we already have inserted. Now we will set the IDs of those input elements to A and B. And now in the output element we will set the name attribute and we will set the value to C. And then we will use the for attribute, and inside we will insert the IDs of those two input elements, and the IDs will be separated with a space. And now we will use the onInput attribute in the form element, which represents the onInput event which is fired when we type value in the input elements. So inside it we'll insert the JavaScript code which will make the actual calculation. So what we'll do here is we will set the value of the output element to the addition of the first input element with the ID A and the second input element with the ID B, and this output will be shown in the output element. So the C represents the output element with the name C, the A and the B represents the value of the two input elements, and what we are doing is auditioning them, and as I said, the output will be shown in the output element. So let's see the results in the browser. So here we have our two input elements, and as we inserted values in the input elements, the calculation was made automatically and we got the addition of those two inputs. But if we remove the first value, we got the letters NaN. Note a number. That's because the second input element didn't have a value and the result of the calculation was not a number. And as you see, as we insert values in the two input elements, they are automatically outputted in the output element. Before ending these lessons, I want to show you another new HTML5 form element, and that is the select element. The select element is a new element in HTML5, and it is written using the select tag. The select tag is a pair element, and you will see this element mostly in the registration pages when you need to select the country you are coming from. So the drop-down list you see on most registration pages where you need to select the country, they are created using this select element. And inside this select element, we need to insert the option element. If you remember, the data list element also had an option element, but that option element was an empty element. And I mentioned it that there is another element which had this same option element, but in that element the option element was paired. So this is that select element in which the option element is a pair element. So the select element is very similar to the data list element. So they both offer a drop-down list in which we can select an option. The only difference is that the data list element is appended to an input element, but the select element is standalone. And the content of the option element is inserted between the opening and the closing tag of the option element. And same here, we can have multiple option elements, and we will insert the same values we've inserted in the data list element, so you can compare them and see the difference. So the select element represents the select list, and the option elements represent the options we can select. So now let's just remove the onInput attribute, and now let's see the results in the browser. And here we have our select list element with the first option selected by default, and we also have an arrow, and when we click the arrow we get a list of all the options we have inserted in the select element. And as we click on the options, the selected option is changed to the one we've clicked. So now you know how to create a select list in HTML5, and remember, the select list is very useful, especially when making a registration form in which the user has to select the country where he is coming from.